Welcome to Davey's Take. Today we're talking about Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning. Possibly the final movie in this franchise. Probably not. So Final Reckoning is the 8th installment in the Mission Impossible franchise. It is a direct sequel to Dead Reckoning, which was originally called Dead Reckoning Part 1. I apologize for being late on this review. I missed my press screening last week. I was off in Europe for a much needed vacation. I was excited for Final Reckoning. Mission Impossible, this franchise, I think has been great. I think recently, ever since Ghost Protocol, there's this quality to these movies when it comes to the action. It has this certain status that you know you're going to get something fantastic when you see these movies. And I rewatched Dead Reckoning this week, and I definitely like it more on rewatch than when I first saw it. My biggest problem with Dead Reckoning was that AI entity plotline sometimes got clunky. But the action in that movie is absolutely masterful and fantastic and exciting, and that's why the movie is a lot of fun. So obviously I was excited to see Final Reckoning and see what they can do with the storyline, possibly wrap up the franchise, and overall just see Tom Cruise do something fucking insane. And I'm sad to say, I wasn't really a fan of Final Reckoning. I honestly didn't really like this movie. It felt like Final Reckoning double down on all the things I didn't like about Dead Reckoning. Final Reckoning focuses more on this entity AI plotline and less on the action. Yes, there is less action in this movie than there is in Dead Reckoning. Honestly, there's less action in this movie than I would say probably Fallout, Rogue Nation, but somehow this is the longest movie in the Mission Impossible franchise. And look, I'm not trying to say that this movie just needs action for 3 hours. There definitely still needs to be a plot. But I feel like the best Mission Impossible movies balance those two things perfectly. We have a perfect blend of action and a plot that's nothing too complicated, but something you're invested in and almost a vessel to get you to that incredible action. Final Reckoning feels like the whole point of this movie is to just listen to exposition and this big threat, and then we throw in a couple action sequences in there. And yeah, we could talk about the action. It is fantastic. I mean, the scale of this movie, it feels so epic. It looks great and grand, and the action itself is helmed so well. This team that makes these movies, it's incredible some of the things that they do. This time around, the big action sequence and set piece is this airplane chase, and it might be the craziest set piece we've seen in this franchise. I know there's so many, but this one was jaw-dropping, it was suspenseful, it was insane, some of the shit that Tom Cruise was pulling off, and I have to give him credit for that. That was fucking awesome. But getting to those set pieces, it felt exhausting. This movie is almost 3 hours long, and it feels way longer than its runtime. And this movie definitely felt like it could have been like 25 minutes shorter. And like I said before, there's so much exposition going on. It's in the scenes leading up to the action. And the other Mission Impossible movies do a good job of explaining things that they need to do. But this movie, it felt like the whole entire movie was just explaining things. And it gets to the point where the stuff they're talking about isn't that interesting. We understand this big threat, that's the entity. We understand its goal, but it's almost repeated to us so many times that the movie just feels boring. Yes, this Mission Impossible movie felt boring. There are things that felt like they dragged out for so long. They also do the thing where I hate when movies do this, but they keep flashing back to older movies. Like, we had this whole sequence in this movie where it was pretty much telling the events of Dead Reckoning, like retelling them like we don't know what happened. But everyone who's here to see Mission Impossible 8 most likely have seen Dead Reckoning. So I don't know why we took a lot of time in this movie to flash back to things that happened in previous movies. They even flash back to things that happened in Final Reckoning, like in the beginning of the movie, and it's just frustrating. There's just a lot of choices these filmmakers made that had me scratching my head because, like I said before, there's this quality to Mission Impossible now, and it's because of this production team. But it seemed like they did all the wrong things to make this movie feel not like the quality that Mission Impossible is supposed to be. Yes, the movie looks grand and epic, and there's some great shots, and the action is all in camera, and it all looks great. But the details, the tiny little details of this movie don't add up well. Like about 7 minutes into the movie, it just felt off. When it came to editing, where characters were at, the pacing, the dialogue, I was watching it going, this doesn't this doesn't feel right. I don't know if this team lost a little bit of steam or momentum, or they didn't know how to wrap up the story, but this whole movie just felt off. I still gotta give respect to Tom Cruise and his production crew, because this does feel like a movie-going experience. I mean, like, watching that plane sequence in the theater was honestly unforgettable. And it's clearly a franchise he cares about. Like, this is his baby. So there's a lot of things that go into this movie and the other movies. You could tell there's a lot of care and effort. But I don't know. Like I said, this one just felt off. It focused on wrapping up this franchise, even though I don't know if this is going to even be the last movie of the franchise. But they have all these callbacks to these previous movies that kind of tie into this storyline. Some of them work, some of them don't. But the movie focuses on, like, these character stuff, this plot with the entity, instead of the grand scale action. And I think they overestimated how much the audience is, like, truly invested with some of these plots and some of these characters. Because this does feel like a direct sequel to Dead Reckoning, but like I said, they focused on all the things that I felt like didn't work for Dead Reckoning. So if you really love this franchise, you love these characters, you love everything about Mission Impossible, I'm sure you're gonna like Final Reckoning. For me, I do love this franchise, but there's certain aspects about it that I can admit aren't perfect. And this movie focuses on some of those aspects. So for me, the movie dragged, especially with this, like, 3-hour long runtime. But I can admit that the movie does look great. It has this grand epic scale to it, especially to the action. But for me, this movie really disappointed me. And I don't think this is the worst in the franchise. I still think that's Mission Impossible 2. But I gotta say, this is probably the second worst in the franchise. I'm gonna give Mission Impossible Final Reckoning 5.5 Davey Daves. I do have to acknowledge there are exciting parts of this movie. Like, the action is better than almost all action movies you'll see. But the overall movie just dragged. Like, there's this submarine sequence that I think is really well done. It's suspenseful. But it just kept going for too long, and they built up to that sequence for so long. It just really felt like they needed to shave a lot of this movie down and kind of beef up some of the action. So, Mission Impossible Final Reckoning. Let me know what you guys thought of it once you've seen it. I'm curious to hear. And thank you so much for watching. Click here to see more of Davey Dave's Takes.